All right. So I think because we have such an exciting and robust program for this evening, we're going to go ahead and get started on time. It's just a little bit after 5, so I'll go ahead. I'll take care of the general housekeeping for this evening. Welcome to everybody. It's good to have you here. My name is Jenny Hinchcliffe. I'm the Exhibitions and Events Manager here at the San Francisco Center for the Book. I'm really excited that you're here in the audience tonight for our program related to our current exhibition called Poetry is Not a Luxury, which is curated by Maymanah Farhat. And Maymanah will be presenting tonight on the artist and illustrator Miné Okubo. So we're really happy. So a little bit about Maymanah. She is an independent curator and art historian focusing on underrepresented artists and forgotten art scenes. She has written for various magazines, including Apollo, Canvas, and Art and Auction. In 2019, she curated the exhibition Poetry is Not a Luxury and co-curated the exhibition History is Not Here, Art in the Arab Imaginary at the Minnesota Museum of American Art in St. Paul. It's been my pleasure to work with Maymanah and learn from her over the course of this exhibition, and I'm excited to be here this evening with her as she, as she introduces us to the artwork and life experiences of Miné Okubo. I also want to say that the San Francisco Center for the Book would like to thank the Center for Book Arts in New York for organizing this exhibition and helping make it available to travel to the West Coast. So thank you. All right, Maymanah, I'm going to go ahead. I'll turn it over to you. And please go ahead.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. It's great to have you with me as I deep dive into one of my favorite subjects, the life and work of Miné Okubo, whose work I've been researching for the past few years and whose Citizen 13660 kind of formed the basis for the show that's on view now at the San Francisco Center for the Book. I was invited last year by the Center for Book Arts in Manhattan to curate an exhibition, a group show for their summer slot. And I thought that maybe Miné's book, her graphic memoir from 1946, Citizen 13660, would be a good place to start. It was interesting to me because it was a very political book in the sense that she's depicting the reality of the concentration camps during World War II, but also it's a very subjective point of view that she offers for the reader. And not only that, but it's comprised of almost 200 drawings that were selected from nearly the 2,000 that she did while she was interned. So for me, that was a really interesting starting point to kind of elaborate on Audre Lorde's idea that poetry is not a luxury, but a necessity for women specifically. I like the idea of creativity and subjectivity being kind of a springboard for radical thought and action. And I wanted to highlight how book arts in general can be very radical, very political, but also very introspective and subjective and reflective as well. So let me start my slideshow with you. You'll have to forgive me. I'm not very tech savvy, but I've been practicing this, so we should be good. This is just a quick look at the exhibition as it's been installed in San Francisco. As I said, it originated at the Center for Book Arts in Manhattan last year, and it'll be traveling to the Minneapolis Center for the Book 2022 in spring. Supposed to travel there next year, but because of the outbreak of the virus, things have been delayed. I hope that you'll be able to make an appointment and see the show in person if you haven't already. I know that things are getting a bit difficult right now in California in terms of lockdown, but hopefully you'll be able to see it before it comes down in December. I wanted to start out by first reading an excerpt from Okubo's artist statement. just so that we can kind of set the stage for what we will be looking at and the kind of ideas that she was interested in. She says, "My interest from the beginning has been a concern for the humanities. Having traveled and studied people and art in Europe, experienced the commercial world of New York, and lived through the Japanese evacuation, I decided to follow the individual road of dedication in art instead of the popular arts of the times. By using all my technical ability and knowledge of art, I followed the difficult road of research and study. I took everything back to the basics, workable and universal truth again. In the process, I found my own identity, my handwriting, the content of reality. I mastered drawing, color, and craft, each to its simplest possible usage." So Miné Okubo was born in Riverside, California in 1912. She was the middle child of 5 children. Her parents were originally from Japan, and they both traveled to the US to participate in the 1904 St. Louis Exposition of Arts and Crafts. Her mother actually was a calligrapher and a painter who trained at the Tokyo Art Institute before immigrating to the US. Miné grew up in Riverside until 1935, when she moved to Berkeley to attend UC Berkeley, where she first got a Bachelor of Arts in art and a master's degree in anthropology in 1936. These are some headshots of Miné Okubo in 1937, shortly before she travels to Europe. But I want to just tell you a little bit about her time in Berkeley, because it'll factor into some of the early work that we see in a bit. At Berkeley, she worked closely with the instructors John Haley and Chiara Obata. Haley was considered the cornerstone of the Berkeley School of Watercolor Painting, and also considered to have assembled one of the strongest art departments in the country at the time. So that was in the 1930s. And I know he continued to teach at Berkeley for 40 years and was very influential into the Bay Area. So she worked, after graduating from UC Berkeley, she worked in the Bay Area for about a year until she received a fellowship to travel to Europe. But while she's still in Berkeley, she paints these types of scenes. Sorry, I'm trying to get a better view. This is just titled Landscape, 1936. And here you can see how she's very influenced by the California School of Watercolors, which was very popular. What I find interesting about this piece is that it also demonstrates the fact that that specific school of art in California at the time was very diverse. There are a number of Asian American artists who worked in this style and who contributed to this movement. And I think that Okubo specifically was influenced by John Haley and the work that he did with the medium. Another work from 1937. Here, I think she's really looking at the work of the Mexican muralists, specifically Diego Rivera, and that point will kind of be tied in a bit when she returns from Europe. It's called A Private Talk. And most of her work are these kinds of like domestic scenes, these genre scenes, lots of landscapes, but very much interested in familial sort of themes, lots of paintings of mothers and children and women. So in 1937, she gets a fellowship from UC Berkeley to travel to Europe for a year. And she ends up visiting over a dozen European countries. She visits Hungary, Switzerland. She uses France as her base, excuse me. She works in Paris with Ferdinand Leger, whose portraits of workers are particularly interesting if we think of her work during this time, and then once she returns back to the Bay Area. She travels by bicycle in the French countryside and takes her paints and her sketchbooks with her, and stops occasionally to depict certain scenes. And she keeps all of these works and she brings them back with her after the war breaks out in 1939. And she finds herself stranded because France has closed the borders. And at that point, she was outside of France. I think she was traveling in Switzerland at the time. Eventually, she makes her way back. Friends are writing her. She's always in touch with people in California, both friends and family. She writes her mother constantly. She sends her a ton of postcards, including some that she draws on and that her mother keeps. And some of the correspondences that she's receiving from friends in California are urging her to come back once the war has started, because they're fearful for the kind of dangerous situations that she'll be in, discrimination that she might face, and so forth. When her mother falls ill, she decides that definitely she's going to return, and she does. She returns to the Bay Area in 1939, and she begins working with the Federal Art Project. She creates mosaics and frescoes for Fort Ord and Monterey, and assists Diego Rivera on his Pan-American Unity mural that he creates on Treasure Island. That's part of the Golden Gate International Exposition of 1939-1940. This is actually a screenshot from a video that I found on San Francisco State University's archive, online archive of Bay Area television. It's incredible. If you have time, you should definitely search it out. There's no sound, but just what's recorded is just unbelievable. I can't believe that they have this footage and that they've preserved it, but I'm grateful for it. And there's Miné working on a fresco demonstration on Treasure Island. So as part of the international exhibition, a number of WPA artists were invited to come and assist Rivera, but also to demonstrate certain techniques. So also in this footage from the demonstrations at Treasure Island, you'll find people that are creating ceramic works, drawing, other types of things like that. Again, part of this whole idea of the World's Fair and the formation of knowledge and kind of instruction that were like central to those expositions. I thought it was particularly interesting that in 37, if we go back a little bit, she's already working in this style. And then she actually works with Diego Rivera and adopts some of the line work of his and the kind of like voluminous sort of figurative approach that's very much his style. This is a work from 1940. It's called WPA. One thing that you should know about Okubo's work is that there hasn't been a lot of research and documentation on her work in the 30s and 40s. She produced quite a bit, and a lot of it is in private collections and public collections. A lot of it's in the archive and collection of the Riverside Community College. There's some with the Japanese American National Museum, some at UC Berkeley, and quite a few pieces from the Oakland Museum. But there still needs to be quite a bit of research and writing in terms of her place in the Bay Area art scene at that time. As I mentioned, she contributed to the watercolor school that was active in the 30s. And here we see that she's producing WPA modernist works in the 40s. This one is called the Artist Studio. It's in the collection of the Crocker Art Museum. And you can also see the influence of Ferdinand Leger as well, in addition to Rivera. At this time, she's also quite active in chronicling what's happening in the Bay Area. For example, there's a work at Riverside Community College, which I wasn't able to get a picture of, but it depicts African-American dock workers on strike in San Francisco. So she never really shied away from political content and was always interested in really depicting the time and place. This is a portrait called Mother and Cat. It's one of the best pieces in the entire collection of the Oakland Museum of California. I do say so myself. It's an incredible work. If you haven't seen it yet, please make the journey to the Oakland Museum. I believe this was her mother, but she had died at this point. I believe she died in 1939. So this is Miné working from memory. So she's active in the Bay Area from 1939 until 1942, when Executive Order 9066 is issued, and more than 100,000 Japanese Americans are detained and later incarcerated. And they're incarcerated in concentration camps throughout the West part of the country. She reports to the Wartime Civil Control Administration on April 26, 1942. Okubo and her youngest brother, who she lives with, are initially sent to Tanforan Racetrack in San Bruno. There they spend 6 months until they're sent to Topaz concentration camp in Utah. And this is actually one of her drawings that she created at the time of her evacuation. It's said that she was never without a pen and a notepad and other art supplies, and she made sure to have them when she left her home and was sent off to the racetrack. The image on the right, I'm sorry, I believe, yeah, is by Dorothea Lange. And again, as most of you probably know, Dorothea was instrumental to documenting the evacuation and the lives of Japanese Americans in concentration camps from a specific vantage point with empathy and defiance, really, because she was working for the federal government at the time and wasn't supposed to be showing the real reality of the camps. This is an aerial view of the racetrack detention center right before evacuees were taken there. And then you can see here we have horse stalls. And that's, Okubo later writes about and actually depicts what it was like to be housed in these horse stalls. And this is Dorothea Lange's photograph of it. So at Tanforan Detention Center, Okubo works with her former professor, Obata, to create art schools for children and for young adults. And what's interesting is that they receive support, moral support and monetary support, actually. Funds were raised by their artist friends that were on the outside, including Dorothea Lange, who sent them funds for artist supplies and materials to start these schools. I was telling Jenny earlier as we were looking over these slides, just how powerful this image is once we know the backstory of the fact that Lange and Okubo were friends and that Dorothea Lange was advocating as best as she could in different ways on the outside, and Okubo would write her and her other artist friends regularly. And actually in an interview much later, she talks about how drawing in the camps was not only to record the realities of the concentration camps, but also to communicate with friends on the outside. One of Okubo's students was a young man, I believe he was 19. His name is Teneyuki Harada. He's still alive. He lives in Berkeley. And this was a painting that he created shortly after he was released from one of the concentration camps. And actually his artistic career began in the camps. And he first learned to paint, and Okubo was his teacher. And of Okubo, he says that he remembers her vividly because she was one of the few women who wore pants, which I thought was sweet. But he just adored her as a teacher and as a friend. This one's called Interlude. And you can see some of his work in LACMA and the De Young. So Okubo and her brother are sent to Topaz concentration camp in Utah. And one of the things that she notes right away are the dust storms. So I found this image and wanted to share it with you just so that you can get an idea of what it looked like and how desolate it was and just how awful, really. So as I mentioned before, Okubo takes to drawing and painting. She creates some gouaches on paper and some charcoals, but she mostly draws. And so while she's incarcerated at Topaz, she does over 2,000 drawings. And what's interesting about these drawings is that she always is the narrator of the drawings. So you can see here she is right in the center, It looks like she's kind of sitting on this elevated wall, the top of a wall. We see the guard here, and then we see other incarcerated people here. I believe this image on the right is from when she's describing her initial stay at Tanforan racetrack. And so here you can see she's in the horse stables, and her brother are trying to make it somewhat livable. She talks about arriving to the racetrack and not having any mattresses, not being provided with any mattresses. And so they had to use sacks to sleep on, and that they were constantly fighting the spiders and the mice and other critters that live there. And I also find it interesting that there's a connection with Ruth Asawa's experience as well, because I understand that Ruth Asawa was also evacuated to a racetrack in San Bernardino. So there's another connection between the two artists. So at Topaz, she becomes very active, not only with setting up another art school for residents, but also with a newspaper called the Topaz Times. And later she joins forces with a couple of writers and another illustrator, and they create this magazine called Trek. And I believe there are 3 issues that they produce. And so Okubo designed the cover image and also some of the inside content. She wrote some of the articles, and all of it is centered on life in the camps. So here's another one of her images. And this one actually is from Tanforan racetrack, because what she describes is being able to see in the background the South San Francisco sign that's on the hill there, reads the industrial city. And while she was actually detained there, she was able to receive permission because she was technically still part of the federal art project. I mean, imagine you're being employed by the government, but then you're being incarcerated by the government. I mean, it's just something else. And so she was able to receive permission to go and complete a mosaic that she was working on in Oakland during the day. And then at night, she had to return to the camp. These are, like I was saying before, she really made a point of staying in touch with her friends that were on the outside. The postcard on the left is one that she sent to Grace McCann Morley, the founding director of SF MoMA in 1943. And actually Okubo had exhibited there right after she returned from Europe. She showed some of the work that she had produced while she was away. And those were significant solo shows for her that really kind of like launched her career in the Bay Area. And then while she was incarcerated, Grace McCann Morley made a point of exhibiting her work as a form of protest against the executive order and the incarceration of Japanese Americans. The image on the right is another postcard that she sent. It says "Greetings from Topaz." I'm not sure who she sent that to, but it's pretty representative of the type of things that she would send. This is one of the gouache on paper works that I was describing. These are the barracks of Topaz. There's a particular scholar that's written about the line drawings that she created, the 2,000 drawings that she created while she was at Tanforan and Topaz. And one of the things that I found really interesting that she said was that it's an aesthetic of mourning. There's so much mourning that you can see in these works. And I really think that that encapsulates the drawing style. And the power of these images too, because what you'll see is you'll have these really kind of harsh lines in the background in terms of like describing the conditions of the camps, the kind of very, I don't know how to describe them, but the buildings and the harshness of the landscape and things like that. And then the people, her figures are always, again, with these rounded shoulders. I mean, there's a definite sense of weight that you can feel through these drawings. And that in itself, I think too, and the idea of exhibiting the grief and mourning is such a strong political act, especially at that time. So in 1943, August 29th, 1943, she contributes an article to the San Francisco Chronicle describing the conditions in the camp and describing how they were evacuated and basically the realities that they have been experiencing over the last year at that point. And one of the interesting things about that is initially looking at this, you would think that the San Francisco Chronicle is doing something really radical. They're actually, allowing an incarcerated woman to describe her experience. But if you look closer, and you can't, I don't know if you can see it here, but I have it in this book, fantastic book on Miné. They've reproduced it. And one of the things that the editors point out is the fact that the Chronicle then goes and puts between her descriptions, they take excerpts from a speech that was given by a federal representative, basically defending Executive Order 9066 and arguing that the government was able to tell who was a loyal Japanese American and who wasn't, and these kinds of awful things. But I wanted to just read quickly an excerpt from Okubo's reflection. She says, bewilderment was expressed by most of the evacuees with loss of home and security. There are many who were embittered, but I think as a whole, despite evacuation, most of us look forward to a better tomorrow. To date, 1,050 indefinite leaves have been granted from the center alone, so that the evacuee may go out of the camp and renew life as a normal American citizen. They're leaving at the rate of 8 a day. So just to give you a sense of what the Chronicle does, there's a direct quote that says, the evacuees read the same newspapers as the rest of us and listen to the same radio programs. Many are reluctant to leave the centers to face a public that seems predominantly hostile. So it's just interesting in the ways in which they are providing a platform, but at the same time censoring Okubo and really kind of setting the tone for what the viewer is going to get from her editorial. So as I was saying, she continues to create works and she continues to send them out somehow. She manages to send works to Grace McCann Morley, and Morley puts a number of her works in the annual exhibition of the San Francisco Art Association, which is held at the time at the museum. And she ends up winning first prize. So her work ends up on the cover. And this is actually a artifact that we have in the exhibition as part of the display on Okubo. This is an original copy of the catalog. There's kind of disputing sort of accounts of how the commission from Fortune magazine happens. A number of people have said that it's because Fortune magazine sees actually this image here, which is reproduced with a review in the San Francisco Chronicle. And the art critic at the time, I forget his name, was actually quite sympathetic to her work and found it profoundly moving, and basically included in his review condemnation of Americans, really, I mean, everyday Americans, for allowing this to happen. So other people say that Fortune magazine actually saw Okubo's editorial, the one that I just showed, and then reached out to her to commission her to illustrate the April 1944 special issue on Japan. So Fortune actually petitions the federal government to release her from Topaz early, and they bring her to New York and they set her up in a studio in Greenwich Village, which she eventually just takes over, and as she finishes work for them and lives the rest of her life there. These are some of the illustrations. We have a copy of this in the exhibition. It's interesting to me too that they would commission her based on the work that she created in the camps, which are very straightforward in their depiction of the injustices that she and her fellow Japanese Americans are experiencing. And then they commission her to produce this kind of propaganda piece on Japan. If you look closely. I mean, if you read some of the descriptions that talk about how the Japanese citizens are obedient and the repressive kind of policies of the Japanese government, and they do so without any kind of irony in terms of reflecting on what had just taken place with the concentration camps in the US. I mean, you can see Okubo's kind of goes back to the type of illustration that she was doing before she was incarcerated. So you can definitely see the link with the WPA type work that she was producing right before she was evacuated. This is Miné in her apartment in Greenwich Village, which apparently was very small. It was a studio apartment. I've read different accounts of friends who describe it in their writings. And basically it was very, very sparse in terms of being furnished, but packed with books and artworks. By the time she dies, she has the 2,000 drawings that she created while she was incarcerated, and plus another 2,000 works that she created after and before. And again, like I said, those are distributed all around the country. So in 1945, after someone sees the issue of Fortune, they befriend Miné and find out about her camp drawings, and they organize an exhibition for her. And the reception to the drawings is very, very strong and very positive. So that same friend, I'm sorry, the name escapes me now, convinces her to pursue a publisher. And at the time of creating the drawings, she doesn't have captions for them. So what she ends up doing is she goes through the 2,000 drawings that she created and selects, I think, roughly around 200, and then organizes them chronologically and then captions all of them. And she does so in what becomes one of the first graphic memoirs in American culture. So Citizen 13660, which is a reference to the number that she was given when she was evacuated, is published in 1946. And again, the reviews are very, very positive. Actually, surprisingly so. People show a lot of empathy and solidarity with her experience and with the community. These are some of the original pages that appear in the 1946 publication. And it's later, I think it's reprinted 3 times. First, Columbia University prints the first edition, and the second edition, which comes out later in the, I believe in the 80s, is published by Washington University. So here you get an idea of what the book looked like when it first came out. So here she's describing her experience of hearing the news of the war breaking out in Europe. And then on the right, she's now at this point, she's at the camp, and she's describing the camp police, how they would spy. Once she finishes with Fortune magazine, she is later commissioned to contribute illustrations for a number of high-profile publications, including Time, Life magazine, the New York Times, and also a number of fiction and nonfiction books. So this is just a selection of some of the books that she illustrated. I know there's Where the Carp Banners Fly. This one's fairly well known. You can't see it on the spine, but it actually says Japan Begins Again. And then this one in the front says A Handbook of International Relations. And the whole time that she's doing her illustrations, she's creating these greeting cards. And she basically draws the greeting card, copies them, and then colors them in, and she sends them to hundreds of friends across the country. And she continues this sort of ritual around the holidays every year for the rest of her life. Again, there are so many countless friends who have written about how they would receive these cards in the mail, how she was constantly sending artworks in the mail. She would produce a series of lithographs and fold them in 3 and then put them in, in an envelope like the one that you see here. And all of these 3 that are shown here, they are all self-portraits. So here in the back, we find Miné as she's depicting herself working on her art in her Greenwich Village studio. And then here she is dressed up as Santa Claus. So she continues to work as a commercial artist until 1951. She gets very tired of it and she decides to stop, and she's going to commit herself full-time to her painting practice. These are some examples of the work that she produces. And again, so what's interesting about this later period of her work is that she's actually moving away from the influence of the WPA period, the influence of European modernism that she adopted. She had while she was in Europe, and also in a way through Diego Rivera. I mean, if we think about how, his robust figures were based on initially on both pre-Columbian sculpture and figurative painting from the Italian Renaissance, or fresco painting, I should say. And then for her to be influenced by Leger and Diego Rivera, I mean, it's interesting how visual culture travels and is adopted and tweaked from one artist to the next. So about these works, she said, "My art is the mastery of drawing, color, and craft, staying with subject and reality, but simplifying like the primitives. It took all those years, but I got it." So for Okubo, the kind of primitive aesthetic that she's talking about is flat color and form that we can find in like ancient Egyptian art, ancient Mayan art. So I think it's, for her, really, it's a way of rejecting Western aesthetic principles and returning back to the basics, so to speak. And that's something that she worked on for several decades after she quit being a commercial artist. As she's creating these works, she shows quite frequently in New York and on the West Coast. There are some shows that are put together featuring incarcerated artists from the period. So she participates in a number of those. In 1995, her incarceration drawings and paintings are featured in the Queens Museum's The View from Within, Japanese American art from the internment camps. The New York Times critic Michael Kimmelman notes that the included artists, quote, "conveyed the emptiness, isolation, and physical hardships internees endured, but the artists also found inspiration in the landscape and in each other, and their work reflects that." I found that really interesting in the sense of Okubo's influence on other Japanese American artists at the time, in terms of her work with Dan Harada at Tanafran, and the kind of conversations, the aesthetic conversations, the dialogues that they were all having, including with Obata as well. I don't know if you saw the Obata show that was at the Crocker. I think it was a couple years ago. But you can, if you compare his work with Okubo's work, I mean, of course, he was her teacher at Berkeley, but they're definitely in conversation. And I know that he also illustrated some publications that were produced at the camps. This is a piece from 1981. Okubo always kind of worked in abstraction. She would experiment quite frequently, even when she was producing these very strong sort of figurative works. And at this point in the 1980s, she does a few abstract expressionist pieces that you can kind of find if you do a quick search on the internet. But she's also, again, she's reducing her figures to these lines, shapes, and colors. So I love this piece because it really demonstrates how she is going back to basics. And I wonder what this building is in the back with the American flag. I wonder if that's a reference to her past. So Okubo is active, as I was saying, she's active with exhibiting with other artists who were incarcerated. And in 1981, she's invited to testify before a congressional committee that's looking into addressing the demands of the redress movement. This is an image of her in 1987, a few months before the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 was passed to the Supreme Court. And I think that wraps up the talk. Let me just make sure that I haven't forgotten anything, but I can open it up for questions if you'd like.
People have questions for Maymanah, you're welcome to go ahead and type them into the chat. A couple questions have actually come in while we've been watching the slideshow. So one of our attendees asks, how did you first learn about Miné Okubo and her work?
Is that my dad asking that question?
No.
Okay. Just Dad, is that you? Well, Dad, if you're watching, actually, it's my dad who turned me on to Miné's work. The two works that I showed earlier, the ones from the 40s, the one that the Phoenix Art Museum has and now that the Crocker has, those two actually were in his collection. My dad's an art dealer in modern and contemporary American art and has known of Okubo's work for a while. And at some point, like 3 years ago, I think, he acquired these two works. And I was over at his place and he said to me, I said to him, who's this? Because I have an affinity for WPA works. And he said, oh, she's a Japanese American artist. You really should look her up. She's totally, she's perfect for you. And I thought, what is he talking about? Who is this? And of course I went and looked it up and he was 100% right. So and then he sold the works. Can you imagine? He sold them like within weeks of turning me on to her work. Like the logic behind that, I have no idea what his aim was, but I was able to stay in touch with the collector who he sold them to, and then actually helped facilitate the placement of those two works in Phoenix and in the Crocker Art Museum. And since then, I've just been researching and trying to find everything that I possibly can on her. Because I'm familiar, and I've been familiar because of my dad with the Bay Area art scene, but I hadn't heard of her work. And I just found it to be so interesting. And I also love too, what I love about her and other artists of the time is that they really kind of, if we deep dive into their work and their life and careers, we see that the Bay Area art scene has been quite diverse and quite accepting for a very long time. I mean, of course, it's had its issues, but even as far back as if we think about like Xavier Martinez, who was active at the turn of the century, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Mexican-American artist who published a newspaper in Spanish and wrote in a native, an indigenous language and produced a magazine for local Mexican-Americans in Oakland. We find these really, really fascinating stories in terms of how the art scene was much more expansive than we know. Which then makes us think, why don't we know about these artists as well as we should? And then we go to institutions and stuff. So.
Sally asks, do you have a favorite period or piece of work of Okubo's?
She's so great. Did you saw? I mean, she's incredible. I mean, the watercolor works are so beautiful. And I didn't even have high resolution images of some of the best works. Like I was describing the one of the scene of the dock workers striking. That one's just like, it just blows you away. I love the graphic memoir. I think it's brilliant. It's incredible in terms of documenting history with wit and defiance, and as I was saying, grief and mourning. I love I love all of it. No, there's not one period that because she never stayed stagnant too, right? She's constantly evolving. I mean, and she's in search of her own aesthetic language, and she has it throughout, but she's really, really insistent towards the end of creating something that sets her apart from other artists of the time. And I think because of that, she wasn't shown as much, and more of the focus was put on her incarceration drawings and works, but the whole body of work is incredible.
Young Mi is asking, where can we find her later color works?
Those are mostly in private collections, unfortunately. When she passed in 2001, it's interesting because she was in the process of putting together a large retrospective with the president of Riverside Community College. He actually came and sat with her. He was and had one of the last outings with her before she passed in 2001. But when she died, she gave all of the work that was in that retrospective, plus the archival materials, to Riverside City College, which she had first attended before going to Berkeley. And then, like I said, she had 3 or 4 other institutions that she distributed other works to, and then her family members. Sometimes you can see them. They come up on auction and things like that, but most of them are in institutions. And again, there needs to be a catalog raisonné or something on her in order to document all the work.
Yeah. So the main bulk of her collection is at Riverside.
Yeah,
like her archive and.
Yeah, so the Oakland Museum, which the catalog of which we have in the exhibition there, I believe that's 1971. They do a mini retrospective for her, and again, the show closes and she gives them the entire work, the entire exhibition. I'm sorry. So the Oakland Museum actually has a really nice collection of her work from all periods.
I'll invite people right now to take a minute to type in some last questions for Maymanah. And while people are doing that, I'll take a minute to mention that we are now scheduling appointments in our gallery here at the San Francisco Center for the Book on Tuesdays. So I would invite each of you to schedule an appointment. You can hop over to our website. We have a direct link on the exhibition page for this exhibit. You can schedule a timed appointment to come see the exhibit. We'd be excited and thrilled to have you. I would encourage everyone to do so. The show is up through December 20th, so there is still a bit of time, but as we all know, the end of the year, things kind of rush to a close. So please come see the show. It'd be great. Let's see, any last questions? Looks like. John commented in, and he said that Miné's drawings from Tanforan and Topaz are especially important because incarcerees were prohibited from bringing cameras into the camps, which you had mentioned and referred to. And then he also mentions that without the drawings by her and other artists, there would be even less documentation about conditions in the camps. And I know that's something that you and I had spoken about earlier today.
Definitely. I mean, and even if we consider the photographs of someone who was committed like Dorothea Lange, they still can't capture the experience the way that the artists themselves did. And what I love about those drawings specifically is, again, she's narrating the scene the whole time. She always places herself in the image.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to share with you, before you go, on my back wall, this is the work that I was describing by Miné's. I know I'm a fanatic. Okay, you just have to bear with me because Miné Okubo is like the love of my life right now. This is a painting that I showed by her student, Tanyuki Harada. This is the interlude from 1949. And on the right, I think my dad, by way of making up for selling the other 2 pieces, tracked down this piece for me by Okubo from 1951. And it's actually it's exact replica of Picasso's 3 Musicians, which I'm assuming that she saw in Philadelphia after she had settled in New York.
What's the title of the Okubo on the left?
3 Musicians. Yeah, it's right after, it's an exact replica of Picasso's. But the interesting thing is, I don't know if you can see it, but in the back, there's this kind of like crosshatch pattern that we find in Picasso's painting. But if you look at the drawings in 13660, you also see that she's using that same crosshatching.
Wow. They're beautiful.
Thanks.
That Harada painting is amazing.
It's incredible, yeah.
Yeah. And the size of it is really interesting, especially paired with that Okubo / Picasso. Because I had imagined that Harada painting as larger for whatever reason. I don't know why. So
I find it interesting that the palettes are very similar too.
Yeah. I love being able to see it hanging up in a real living space, not a museum.
We were so happy to reunite.
It's awesome. Well, I guess we'll have to say goodbye for now. There are no further questions. Do you have any last parting thoughts?
No, thank you so much for attending the talk. I want to plug this book, which I have nothing to do with, but is such a rich resource.
Oh, let's see. And the title is Miné Okubo.
Following Her Own Road.
Following her. I'm like quickly typing into the chat here. Her Own Road. And who's the author?
It's edited by Greg Robinson and Elena Creef, Creef.
Edited by Greg, you said, Greg Robinson.
Yeah. And what's great is that it features a number of her statements. And I believe even the statement that she presented during the congressional hearing as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Let's see. And what was, oh, Elena, I see. Yeah. Elena Creef. Nice. Oh, then, John has one last question. He's asking if Citizen 13660 has been reprinted.
This is the copy by University of Washington Press. And there's another one too. I think it's 3 times. And every time it's reprinted, it wins like ton of awards. Yeah. I know in the 80s when it was reprinted in a kind of like a square format, it won the National Book Award.
And you said that's Washington University Press?
Yeah, University of Washington Press.
Okay, UW.
But you can still find first edition copies online.
And the first edition is what we have here in the exhibit. So attendees saw a photograph of the cover earlier tonight. So
right.
Nice. All right, so some notes, some homework for everyone. All right, well, I never want to say goodbye because it's always so informative and fun and interesting and great to hang out with you for the evening.
Thanks, Jenny.
No, thank you. Thank you for another fantastic program.
Thanks. And thank you, everyone. I hope you found it worthwhile.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And we look forward to seeing you online in the future. And again, if you can, be sure to make a reservation, schedule an appointment to come see the exhibit. We would love to have you. And Maymanah, thank you so much, so very much. Always a pleasure.
Guys.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you later, and good night.